Drew here, and talking about this new series based on the novel by Liane Moriarty. For those of you who don't know, it's just about a bunch of strangers going to a wellness center, and the person in charge of the wellness center, played by Nicole Kidman, is manipulating them and pushing them to their limits as she tries to accomplish some mysterious purpose. So that's the basic premise. My wife, when this was announced, she was super excited because she loves Liane Moriarty. And this was apparently one of my wife's favorite Liane Moriarty novels. So I was interested in it too. Obviously, Liane Moriarty is best known for the adaptation of her work that premiered on HBO, which is Big Little Lies. So I was interested in this too because I enjoyed Big Little Lies and I was up for some more prestigious soap. But it was weird because the trailer came out, and some of you might have watched my reaction to that trailer. I was kind of stunned at how little of a hook there was. Like, the cast is amazing. I think this is honestly, I'm having trouble remembering a better cast on TV. I'm sure there has been, but I can't think of one. So it was astonishing to me, that these actors were on the show. But when I saw the trailer, I was like, what's the hook? Like, where is the hook? And as I started watching these first 3 episodes, at one point I turned to my wife and I said, there are thriller elements in this, right? Like, it's not just like a wellness retreat. It's not just like therapy. She's like, oh yeah, there's a ton of thriller elements. And this gets to something that I think is a little bit of a problem with the show. And I like the show on the whole, but it has a lot of problems. But the first problem I would point out is, again, what's the hook? I think there are some hints of thriller-esque aspects. I think one of the most interesting things is seeing, it's revealed at one point that Masha has picked these individuals to come to the wellness retreat because they will interact with each other in ways that bring out each other's demons. And it's interesting wondering what different interactions, as you watch these interactions, which people were brought there to push other people and to press their buttons. I mean, that's, something very entertaining. But really the most thrillery element in the first 3 episodes is, one, we don't really know what Masha's up to. We don't know if she's actually altruistic and wants to help these people or if she has some sinister motives. And it seems that as characters do things that are more and more out of character, that perhaps she is drugging them, giving them some kind of illicit substances that are causing them to act out of character. And that's kind of a little bit frightening. But that doesn't get played up enough in these first 3 episodes, I feel. And also that someone is texting Masha these threatening messages saying that it's like her last week to live. But to me, both of these things are severely underplayed, and it ends up feeling just like you're at a wellness retreat with these characters. That's basically what it feels like. And I mean, I'm sure some people enjoy that, but I never watched in therapy for a reason, because I don't think that conceptually is very cinematic or very interesting. It's certainly not very mainstream, which is what this show is probably striving to be. It seems like this is perfectly calibrated to be the next Little Fires Everywhere or Big Little Lies. And it's going to be interesting to see if it takes off like those shows, because to me, at least in these initial 3 episodes, which I liked, I don't think it will. I think people will tune in, but I'm not convinced that they're going to keep watching necessarily once they see what this show is actually like. The other thing that strikes me, my wife and I, we recently just finished a show called White Lotus, and there was a couple ways that White Lotus did these things that I think this show should be striving to do. I highly recommend White Lotus, by the way. But the things that it did that I think this show should be trying to do, one, it had a really, really obvious hook. It starts off with a body in a coffin, and you spend the whole series wondering who is going to die. That's a good hook. This show, like I said, there is no hook. Like, I'm constantly wondering, what are we supposed to be wondering about? The text messages that Masha is getting, well, that's, they need to play that up more. It's also just not as visually and mentally captivating as a body in a coffin. Like, that immediately grabs your attention, whereas text messages that are threatening, I mean, I feel like that's just not that cinematic. But regardless, the fact that the hook is not there, I mean, it makes this series just seem like I said, a bunch of interactions between characters at a wellness retreat. And they're interesting enough characters, and they're portrayed by some fantastic actors. But on the whole, I feel that there's this aspect that could have taken it to the next level that's lacking. My wife, and this is the other thing I think that this show could have learned from White Lotus, as the show came out, my wife was bemoaning the fact that it gets released so late at night in our time zone, and at such a time that we're not going to watch it live, because when the White Lotus was airing on a weekly basis, we would text my brother and his wife about the show, and we were just having a ball. You know, it was a lot of fun to just text our reactions to stuff, because HBO releases things at a set time, and it's a time that people will show up and watch. Whereas this show is being released at such a time, I think most people are going to wait and watch it sometime during the day on Wednesday. They're not going to watch it the minute it is released on Hulu. And, you know, I understood my wife's point about that, but something that struck me as I was watching these 3 episodes is I don't know what I would be texting about. There just weren't a ton of water cooler moments. It just felt, you know, like a lot of conversations between characters. Some of them very entertaining. Some of the interactions were funny, and a lot of them were engaging, but it didn't seem to me that there was standout moments where I was like, that's something that I would be texting Austin and his wife about. Like, it just didn't strike me that way. And maybe you'll feel differently. Maybe you'll be tweeting the heck out of the show. But for me, that just wasn't a thing. So it's going to be interesting to see how the show takes off or doesn't on a weekly basis. They released 3 episodes initially, and you know, so you can watch the first 3 episodes now, and then they're going to release an episode every week. So to me, this show is good but not great so far, and it has potential to get better, but it's hard to say if it will or not. Not having read the book and not really knowing where it's going. If I had to attribute its problems to one thing, I think it's the director. I think David E. Kelley, you know, he mass produces these shows, and he's got a knack for just creating things that people are going to want to tune in and see. But in this show, it's directed by Jonathan Levine. And Big Little Lies had a very, very talented auteur director. In this show, Jonathan Levine, if you look at his repertoire of films, he's directed things that were pretty broad comedies, and some of them were quite bad, in my opinion. And the thing is, I think that makes him a poor fit for this material. We don't always talk about, you know, television as being mainstream or more independent style, but this is definitely mainstream television. Like I said, it seems perfectly calibrated to entertain and to hit all these very, very obvious notes. And Jonathan Levine, I think that it's pretty clear to me, like the acting across the board, like I said, this is an amazing cast of fantastic actors, but the performances seem broad, like something you would see in a comedy. And I'm not just saying that because Melissa McCarthy is in the cast. Her and Bobby Cannavale, they play interesting characters. I kind of wondered if her character is not intended to be a stand-in for Liane Moriarty, because her character is an author, and whenever there's an author character in a book, I always wonder if the author is inserting themselves into the story a little bit. But the way that these 2 characters interact, there's clearly some chemistry and some tension between them. But to me, they've been in films before together that were comedies, broad comedies, and the way that they're interacting here and the way that they're acting here, it really struck me. And these are actors you wouldn't necessarily associate with subtlety. If you watched Bobby Cannavale and Boardwalk Empire, you know what I mean. But you know, they're capable of subtlety. They're capable of subtle acting. I mean, Melissa McCarthy was fantastic in Can You Ever Forgive Me? But here I feel like they both feel like they belong in a broad comedy. They feel like they belong in a different show than this one. And all the performances pretty much across the board feel overly broad and kind of like caricatures more than performances to me. And to me, I have to fault the director for that. When it's every single actor, pretty much, you have to say that the director was directing them this way. And it's a little bit of a problem. I would have liked to see the actors be more subtle. Now, one actress does give an incredibly subtle performance, and that's one of the lesser-known cast members, Asher Ketty. I think that she gives the most subtle performance of the cast as this woman who is grieving this family tragedy and who is experiencing this distance from her husband, played by Michael Shannon. So to me, her performance stands out for its subtlety, if not for like the star power of her as an actress. But, you know, from my perspective, the most interesting performances were from Samara Weaving, first off, as this person who's clearly a social media influencer who's been cut off from social media and being kind of forced to consider like her life and why she lives the way she does. I've always enjoyed her performances, but here I think she's just a riot to watch. And one of the few characters where I feel like a broader and more comedic approach works because of the nature of this character. I also think Melvin Gregg, not someone I'm terribly familiar with, but his character and his performance to me stand out. I think that he just brings a sincerity and a genuineness to it. And he just had me laughing out loud a couple times with his line deliveries. I also think that Regina Hall, again, not someone I'm terribly familiar with, but her performance I think is quite good. Again, not that subtle, but she really does. I found her character to be the most likable and someone who I was always engaged when she was on screen. Some of my favorite moments were her interactions with Samara Weaving's character. I feel like they bring out the best or the worst of each other, depending on how you want to look at it. And I really enjoyed some of their interactions, especially during this scene that takes place in an outdoor sauna type experience. I think that of these episodes that have been released, I think the third episode was the best. I mentioned that things were overly broad, but I think that as the episodes went on, I think they had to establish an awful lot early because they have like 12 characters and they're trying to give them all a little bit of development. But as the series went on and you got to this third episode where things kind of slowed down a little bit and where you could see the characters starting to open up to each other and to reveal their truer selves, I feel like things started to become more interesting. I think maybe this won't be most people's favorite episode of the three, but to me it was, because I feel like I said, the premiere felt a little bit rushed and broad, and this isn't exactly a subtle show, and that's not a diss, because, you know, I mean, this is a kind of a soapy thing, so you kind of expect it to be kind of wild and a little bit over the top, but I feel like the third episode was the most subtle and where you started to see a little bit more psychological heft. I wouldn't say this was a terribly deep show or an incisive one. It's really interested in the characters as people, but it's not really trying to make any broader statements about society as far as I can tell. It's really just, you know, like The White Lotus was basically skewering rich people. This show is not really interested in doing that, and that's fine. It's, you know, it's a perfectly valid approach. But to me, the third episode was the one where I was like, okay, I kind of see what this show is going to be like for the next 5 episodes, and I'm on board. In the second episode, I found myself about halfway through wondering if I was actually going to enjoy this show. It feels networky at times. It definitely doesn't have the prestige value of an HBO show, for example, but I still feel like it's a pretty strong show. And the third episode also had a really remarkable monologue by Michael Shannon at the end of the episode that was just, you know, immediately you were just pulled in, and the emotions of the scene, it almost brought me to tears. It was a very, very powerful moment, and primarily because of Michael Shannon's very, very strong acting in this scene and the way he gives this speech. Minor quibble, and this is just an odd observation, but in the third episode, they are starving the participants in the retreat, basically saying you have to fast until the evening and we're just going to give you a shake. So the episode focuses on the male characters all being extremely hungry and being extremely, you know, ravenous, and they're foraging, trying to find some food. But the female characters aren't. Like, they're just sitting around, you know, skinny dipping and hanging out in this pool of water and talking to each other and opening up to each other. But they don't act like they're hungry. And it was funny to me because I'm like, I'm not trying to be, You know, I'm not trying to make any kind of remark about gender, but like, why aren't the women hungry? They would be hungry too, and potentially more hungry than the men, I would imagine, but this is just a minor complaint. So on the whole, would I recommend this show? Yes. I mean, it's not as good as I had hoped it would be, but it's still, I think, worth your time. And I mean, I just don't think there's a lot of shows out right now. And I think that's pretty obvious because I haven't been putting out a ton of reviews, not from lack of desire, just because there hasn't been a lot that I had wanted to watch or wanted to review. So those are my thoughts on the first 3 episodes of 9 Perfect Strangers. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews on a weekly basis of the show, please consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching.